Joined today by Senator Tom Cotton. He is Arkansas's junior senator. I like to remind him that he's the junior senator from Arkansas, elected in 2014. Welcome.
Thank you, Roby. It's good to be on with you. Maybe junior senator in the entire Senate since I'm there.
Are you still the youngest?
That's a low bar to clear in the Senate.
I got you that. So, all right. Well, there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court. It's been a little bit of a subject of a debate for the last couple of weeks here. Do you want the appointment? Do you want to be on the Supreme Court?
No, I don't. I'm very happy to be serving the people of Arkansas in the Senate.
Well, this notion that we should let the people decide the outcome of the Supreme Court through the election, the presidential election in the fall, there is precedent all over the place on this in the nation's history. Democrats and Republicans alike have probably not always been consistent with their opinions on this. But is this a stall tactic to keep Obama from getting the appointment that he wants?
I'm kind of surprised that you're insinuating that politicians are sometimes inconsistent. I think it's important, Roby, that we let the American people decide. They've rendered something of a split decision in the last two elections. In 2012, they did elect President Obama, in part to nominate justices and judges. But in 2014, they elected me and a net 9 new Republican senators, in part to say stop to the Obama agenda of overregulation, executive action, and packing the courts with left-wing judges, sometimes by violating the rules. So I think we should let the American people decide, and they'll have a choice to, in just a few months to fill not just the White House and the Congress, which is rare enough, but also decide who's going to control the balance of power in the Supreme Court. So I don't think there's any reason to rush into that decision.
Do you think Judge Merrick Garland, do you think that he is left of center? Do you think that he is not a conservative judge?
Well, there's no doubt that he's left of center. But this is not really about Judge Garland. This is not about Judge Garland as a person or as a jurist. This is about the principle of letting the people decide. And they're the ultimate people who govern our society. They govern through their elected representatives in the Congress and the White House and indirectly on the courts. And it's a very rare opportunity they have to make that kind of decision. So in just a few months we'll know. And I certainly don't know who's going to win the White House. I hope that a Republican wins it. I hope that we retain control of the Senate. But this is not a stall tactic simply to stop President making a decision. This is a decision to let the American people make the decision.
You could use that same logic, though, on a lot of decisions that Congress and the U.S. Senate have to make. So why don't we just grind to a halt during a presidential election year on any decision?
Well, few decisions are as consequential about a Supreme Court justice, especially when the balance of power is at stake in the Supreme Court. I, for one, think the Supreme Court has taken on too big a role in our society, a bigger role than the Founding Fathers envisioned for it. But as long as they're playing that role in some cases of a super legislature, taking decisions out of the hands of the people by making them a matter of constitutional law, I think it's important that we let the American people decide who's going to be in charge of the Supreme Court indirectly through their elected representatives.
So let's play hypotheticals here. Let's just say that a Democrat wins, if it's Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Let's say a Democrat wins in November. Will you push for a quick hearing to appoint President Obama's pick?
I don't anticipate that. Senator McConnell has said that we should wait until the next president. He controls the floor agenda. But clearly, if the American people elect Hillary Clinton, or for that matter, Bernie Sanders, then they are going to make this nomination. Again, I hope that's not the case, but they'll make the nomination, and in due course, we should consider it on the merits and have a vote.
All right, let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back and talk about the state of the presidential race, and we'll talk a little bit about ISIS and national security as well. All right. Sure. With Senator Tom Cotton. We will be back right after this word from our sponsor. I'm Roby Brocker with Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, let's talk about the state of the presidential race. A likely scenario is Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, although neither one of those is decided. You've said consistently that any Republican candidate is going to be better than Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, so I do not need you to repeat that to me. Of the 3 remaining GOP candidates, Kasich, Cruz, Trump, which one do you think is the most qualified?
Well, I don't think that we can say that it's going to be Hillary and Donald in the general election. You know, we still have more days ahead of us in this election, in the Republican primary at least, than we have behind us. And it's still relatively close if you look at the possibility of any candidate getting to a majority of our delegates. And I think the FBI is going to have something to say about Hillary Clinton's nomination. But I do think that any of our nominees would be better because I think Hillary Clinton has been disqualified from being the commander-in-chief. She is the architect of Barack Obama's foreign policy, and she has shown an utter disregard for the handling of sensitive national security secrets. So the American people in the Republican primary are going to decide who the Republican nominee is going to be, and if no one reaches a majority, then the delegates at our convention will decide. But ultimately, any of our nominees would be better than Hillary Clinton.
But back to my question, of the 3 that are still remaining right now, who's the most qualified?
Roby, I've been neutral in this race throughout, and I intend to remain so, in part because Arkansas's voters have voiced their opinion in our primary, And I want to be able to provide a source of policy insights for our party as a whole. And I can make the case about the Islamic State or about funding our military or about the Iran nuclear deal more effectively if I'm speaking for myself and speaking for the people of Arkansas, not a specific presidential candidate.
I know you have said Hillary Clinton's email situation disqualifies her for running for president. It hasn't disqualified her yet. She has not been accused. She's not been indicted. There's just an investigation going on. Do you think that something will happen? Do you have some sort of inside knowledge that something is going to happen, or is this just wishful thinking and hope at this point in time?
Well, just
from a Republican
based
point of view?
based on the public reporting alone, much less some of the reports I've read as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I think it's clear that Hillary Clinton mishandled classified information. But even more than that, the fact that she specifically set up an unsecure private server on which she conducted official business that is susceptible to hacking by Russia or by China or North Korea or Iran goes to show what a cavalier disregard she had for the law.
Is this a political disqualification or is this a criminal
disqualification? Well,
disqualification?
no, there's a real legal case. There's a reason why dozens of FBI agents are investigating. There's a reason.
Other secretaries of state have done this as well.
No one has specifically set up a private unsecure server to avoid record-keeping requirements, to avoid the Freedom of Information Act. I think that disqualifies her from being the commander-in-chief. Don't think there's any doubt that a junior official in our government or a junior officer in our military would face the gravest legal consequences if they had undertaken such an action.
I would be surprised if something happens before November on that, though. I think those investigations take a long time, and you got a lot of political charge there. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think Jim Comey, the director of the FBI, is a straight shooter. And if the FBI agents believe that there's a case to be made against Hillary Clinton, they will recommend an indictment. I can't say that the Attorney General and the President will let that indictment go forward, but I have faith in the frontline agents in the FBI.
Let's talk about ISIS. We obviously had the Belgium attacks not too long ago. This is still pretty fresh for a lot of people. Donald Trump said this week, and you've met with him within the last week, that NATO needs to change. You agree with that statement. What do you think needs to change?
No, I actually disagree with the point that Donald was making that we need to cut NATO funding. I think NATO is the most successful security alliance in the history of mankind. Now, Donald did identify a challenge that we've had with NATO since the end of the Cold War, which is Europe is not carrying its share of the load. Each NATO ally is supposed to send at least 2% of their economy on the common defense. In the Cold War, it was split about 50-50, U.S. and Europe. Now it's split 70-30. I don't think the U.S. should cut our spending, though. I think we should urge our European allies to increase their spending, in part so we can avoid future attacks like we've seen in Brussels and Paris, or we can avoid the invasion of NATO allies like Latvia and Estonia, as we've seen in Ukraine.
We hear from a lot of the presidential candidates almost some blanket accusation that we need to be more vigilant with the Muslim community. Are we talking about Islam in general, or should we be more specific to talk about the cult of ISIS and what that is? That seems to be dangerous rhetoric to me.
Yeah. We're talking about radical Islamic jihadists, which is a very small percentage of all the Muslims in the world. There's about 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. If only 10% of those harbor any grievances or resentment toward the West, particularly the United States, that's 160 million. If only 10% of those are susceptible to radicalization, that's still 16 million. If only 10% of those actually are willing to take up arms and go to Iraq or Afghanistan in the last decade and fight, or go to Europe now and try to kill Westerners, that's still 1.6 million, more than half the people in the state of Arkansas. So the vast majority of Muslims around the world want exactly what we want. Yeah. They want a husband and wife, they want kids, they want a job that provides them some prosperity, they want a relationship with their God. They don't want to kill us. But because there are so many Muslims around the world, and there's a very small segment of them that do want to commit acts of terrorism against the United States, we do have to be very vigilant. And what we've seen in Paris and Brussels and San Bernardino is that we can't play defense and win the war on terrorism. We have to play offense.
Is the rhetoric too red hot, though? Does it need to cool down? Does it need to be more specific?
I think it's important that we recognize that there's only a very small percentage of Muslims around the world who are willing to commit acts of terrorism. And here in the United States, has done a better job of assimilating and integrating immigrants of all kinds, to include immigrants from Muslim lands. In fact, senior FBI officials will tell you that Muslim Americans are often the leading source of tips and leads to investigate the very kind of radicalization that we've seen in Europe. Europe doesn't have that. That's why you have these no-go zones in cities like Brussels and Paris. That's a very bad thing for them. It's a very good thing that Muslim Americans have such a good relationship with our law enforcement.
I've got to wrap it up, but yes or no, the rhetoric needs to be cooled down?
I think the rhetoric on,
Yes or no?
on all sides could be more measured and focus specifically on the problem that the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and similar groups pose to us.
All right, Senator.